I was just watching this Daily Wire Backstage video, and I thought the last 16 minutes or so was really interesting, and so I thought I'd clip it out and send it out to my subscribers, to my network, because you guys would probably find it very interesting too. Jordan Peterson gets mentioned briefly near the end, but the entire conversation I thought is very interesting to have. So my plan for this video is just to play the clip and for you to hear it, and I won't really intervene at all with my commentary.
One of the feelings that I had during the tragedy in Paris this week, the priest who ran in and saved, as you say, the crown of thorns. I do not believe that to be the crown of thorns. You say it is the crown that rested upon Christ's head. I think it's a crown that Louis IX bought at a bazaar in the Middle East 1,200 years after Christ. But I'm not only going to pick on Catholics, because that's not the entirety of my point.
It's only like 95.
By the way, Knowles' face was like just sheer disappointment when you said that.
Knowles is like, please don't ask me on camera to say whether or not I think it's the crown of thorns.
I absolutely think it's the crown of thorns.
So my point...
You and I can we go out and just have a drink together?
I want to have a serious conversation.
Yeah.
My point is that for hundreds and hundreds of years, millions and millions of people have made pilgrimage to behold the crown of thorns, to pray at the foot of the crown of thorns. Many of them have walked away from that having had transcendent religious experiences. Others have probably walked away feeling that their prayer wasn't granted and lost their faith, right? Because human religiosity is a very complex thing. The experience of God, I am willing to grant, may very well be, and in innumerable cases, in fact, is an authentic experience of God, though you couldn't pay me enough to say that the crown of thorns that was in Notre Dame Cathedral ever rested on the head of Christ. Similarly, in Israel is a garden tomb. And it's interesting, if you've ever been to Israel, there are Protestant locations where certain things are said to have happened, and there are Catholic locations where certain things are said to have happened. And because Catholicism grew into authority at a time when most people lived mean, meager, terrible lives in medieval Europe, when people spent most of their time outdoors, people, like on Monty Python, they moved mud from one hole to another hole. When they would walk into these great cathedrals, they had never seen anything like it. They didn't feel the presence of God when they saw a sunset. When they saw a sunset, what they felt was the onset of cold and fear. Darkness. When they would make pilgrimage to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and they would see these gilded statues and these unbelievable buildings that took centuries to build, that elevated the experience of what they were seeing. When I see the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, I'm not a medieval mud farmer, and I'm not a papist. And so when I see the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, I don't feel any religious experience. When I go to the Garden Tomb, however, because I've spent my entire life in the West, indoors, air-conditioned, well-fed, when I see, this is what the scene would have looked like. This is the exact aesthetic. That transports me, because evangelicalism and Protestantism came later when we had modernity. I'm being transported out of modernity to touch what once was. The result is millions of Protestants have made pilgrimage to the Garden Tomb in Israel, and millions of them have had religious experiences praying at the foot of the tomb, weeping at the foot of the tomb. They will say to you, there is no question, I visited the Garden Tomb, there is no question that is where the resurrection took place, because I felt God there. And yet, the Garden Tomb is almost certainly not the tomb of Christ. Almost certainly, meaning there is less than a 1% chance that the Garden Tomb in Israel ever held the body of Christ. Millions of Protestants would be just as mad at me about saying that as would be Catholics for saying that the crown of thorns is not the crown of thorns.
Well, you do have this great ability to offend every single person. Yeah.
But herein is the question that I want to leave. The question that I want to get each of you to weigh in on, because it really was kind of a startling and an unsettling notion as I watched that beautiful building burn. And I thought, what is it that... Or we each believe of our religion, and Judaism undoubtedly has similar problems. I'm just not expert to speak to them. What is it that we believe that the God of Abraham actually identifies himself as truth. He is not only the God of truth, he is truth. The actual concept of truth is embodied in God. What does it say that his people can have authentic experiences of the God of truth through fabrication, through things that are themselves almost certainly not true?
Can I answer that?
Please.
All right. First, let me start with a story. When I was in Israel, I have the same feeling as you. When I go to the Catholic sites and they tell me this is the place where this happened and I know it's not, I feel there's a sentimentality that goes against my nature. I'm not a sentimental person. When I was in the Mount of Olives, there's a church there called the Church of the Rock. Yeah. And it's built around a rock, and the rock is, by tradition, supposed to be the place where Jesus fell down, sweated blood, and prayed to God to let this cup of crucifixion pass from him. And I walked in, and totally cynical, walked around the corner and thought, oh my God, this is the place. Yeah. And I was imbued with the Spirit. It lasted for about an hour. I walked around in a kind of daze of inspiration. I don't know whether that's the place or not, but I know that on that telephone, I got a call. Jesus spoke in parables. Those parables are untrue. There was no man with two sons, one of whom became a prodigal and the other one stood. He knew that was an untrue story. And he told that story, and yet, when he told that story, he was giving you a telephone on which the Spirit was calling. I have a lot of sympathy for that. I'm not a sentimental person, and I'm not a superstitious person. And when I see things that aren't true, I have the same, I do, I have the same feeling of you of whoa, whoa, whoa. But when somebody's on the other end of the line, I pick up the phone. Yeah. And I think that parables, stories, fictions are ways in which meaning comes to us.
Is it a slight distinction, though, that the parable wasn't... When Christ told a parable, he said, here's a parable. He didn't say, this is true.
It's not a slight distinction. It's an important distinction. Yeah. There's certain kinds of stories you tell. There was a man who had two sons. It doesn't matter if it's true or not.
Right.
Certain kind of stories, I saved two people from a burning building. It matters whether that's true or not. So what's that?
He was there at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
We do want to distinguish between those stories, but we don't want to forget the fact that everything, in a way, is a story. Every life itself is a story, and it communicates. I mean, I think this is the point of telling parables. By the way, I think this is what Jesus was saying when he told parables, was not, oh, this is the meaning, but physical things have a meaning. Mm-hmm. And I think that when we live that way, we live in truth. And so I'm not as alienated by the crown of thorns, which I'm with you, I don't believe that's the crown of thorns. I'm not as alienated by that when it communicates to somebody the truth of
I think
the crucifixion.
there's also, for me, I don't believe any of the stuff that you guys are talking about, right?
Yeah, well, you're going to hell.
Right, of course. I mean, this is clear. But when Notre Dame burned, I was very upset about it, and Notre Dame has a pretty significant anti-Semitic history, right? I mean, there are statues there that talk about supersession of Catholicism over Judaism. The copies of the Talmud were burned right in front of Notre Dame in the 13th century, and still I felt something. The reason that I felt something was because we are all part of this same river of history in the civilization, and I owe something to even the people who persecuted my people living in a civilization that is built on those foundations. There's a lot of fossils in the fossil record here, and that does not mean that I'm not standing atop a bunch of different layers of sediment. And so there's something to that. I think as far as your more basic question, which is, how do people get value from these things, I think that there's something else to it, and that is we innately get value from things that other people have imbued with value. Yeah. Meaning that when I look at Notre Dame, the reason that strikes me in a way that a new church burning would not is because that did take 200 years to build, and that was blood and sweat and tears of people. Those were people bringing ox carts full of stone from far-off lands to build this monument to God.
182 years.
Yeah, and there's something deeply wonderful about the idea, especially in a society where everything is supposed to be given to us like right now. We want it right now, and we're not supposed to think about tomorrow. There is no tomorrow. We're not supposed to even think about the national debt because that's too difficult for us to think about. Think about the idea that you're going to start building a building that your great-great-great-grandchildren will probably not live to see completed, but you're going to start building it. To me, that's the story of civilization and the story of religion, which is that you are not here to finish the task. You are here to begin the task. And so when you see people who have completed that task, and when you see people go and spend their money to go and worship at something even that I don't believe in, I think the fact that they are even going to pay homage to God using their own money to pay homage to something that people have imbued with value, even if I think that the thing itself doesn't actually hold the value, that is a testament to the place that God holds in human hearts that is ineradicable. You cannot get rid of it. And I think secular society has tried to erase it and suggest that people don't have that innate need for God, that innate yearning for God. Yeah. The yearning is still there, and without any fulfillment of the yearning, the unhappiness is the only thing that's left.
You know, this is a major distinction in the response to Notre Dame between conservatives and radicals, because all myths are true. All myths are true. You don't believe in the certain relics or something. Even legends, even the legends of saints killing dragons, have some bit of truth to them. They tell some truth. And this is a big distinction that was drawn by the philosopher John Stuart Mill between the conservative Carlyle and the radical Bentham. He said the radicals, what we would call now the leftists, when they see something like the Cathedral of Notre Dame or a relic or some tradition or some legend, they ask, is it true? And what the conservative like Carlyle asks is, what does it mean? What does the cathedral mean? What does it mean that people have come on pilgrimages to this relic of the crown of thorns? What does it mean that people have come up with this legend? This legend has developed of some saint slaying a dragon. What does that mean? What does it say about us? What does it say about where we come from? What does it say about what we worship? That is obviously the sane view. That is obviously the humble view. That is obviously the view that gives you awe and wonder and veneration and an appreciation of your society and civilization. And there's another view that is just ready to rip it and burn it down.
And you saw that article in Rolling Stone.
It's obviously the view of...
It was an honest article.
It's obviously the view of Christ when he tells parables. I mean, I think that is the message of parables. And by the way, you know, if anything speaks to me of God's truth, it's the music of Bach. And when I listen to the music of Bach, you and I, who disagree on the divinity of Christ, you and I are swimming in that stream, and we're there together, and that stream is carrying us to the same place. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that you and I are going to be arguing about the truth in heaven. You know, and
hell. Hell, you meant hell, right?
No, that's you. That was
okay, all right.
I'll argue with you.
And that the stream of Bach, which speaks to us of God, is going to carry us there. I think that's exactly what you're talking about. I agree with you 100% that the meaning of things is so much more important than their physical
more interesting,
being.
by the
and
way.
more interesting.
I agree in as much as when the Taliban brought down those statues of Buddha in Afghanistan in the 90s, I felt devastated by that.
Me too.
But the slight distinction that I want to make is that we here in this room are not Buddhists, but we are all each in our way believers in the God of Abraham who defines himself by the truth. So what's interesting to me is I completely agree with the meaning. I completely agree with the communal experience of the millions of people who've made pilgrimage. They spent centuries building, and that imbues it with power and meaning. I completely agree. The subtle question that I'm asking though is, how is it that God, the God of truth, actually speaks to people through falsehood? And maybe it's as simple as the crown of thorns recommends God, but God does not recommend the crown of thorns. Maybe it's the garden tomb and the church of the sepulchre. They both recommend God. God may not recommend either the church of the sepulchre or the garden tomb.
But I've spent my life as a novelist telling stories that aren't true. I mean, about people who don't exist. And why? Why do I do that?
But again, the subtle distinction is you don't claim that they're true.
I
the
get
millions
that.
of people who make pilgrimage to the garden tomb and the millions of people who make pilgrimage to the crown of thorns do so on the basis that it is in fact the crown of thorns, or that it is in fact the tomb of Christ.
If people even knew that, so they just switch locations, meaning that, okay, so then they would just switch. But like, to me, what is happening is a modern form of the korbanot. It's just a modern form of sacrifice. You're going to a place, to an altar, and you are sacrificing to God, and you are saying, here are all the things that I have brought with me, and I'm sacrificing those in these places. And the place happens to be the place, but that's...
This is right.
But, but I think that, if you told people, okay, so we find out through DNA analysis that the crown of thorns never was on Christ's head. Okay, fine. So then they just go to Notre Dame and they visit Notre Dame and they don't visit the crown of thorns.
Yeah.
And this is the distinction between veneration, which is such a foundational conservative principle, and worship. They're not the same thing. Nobody is going to worship the crown of thorns. Nobody is going because of the crown of thorns itself. They are going because it
should.
rested on the head of Christ. Right? They are venerating something which is an icon, which is transporting you to something much higher, to actually the same thing, whether you're going to the Garden Tomb or the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
What people who are not religious, I think, don't understand about people who are religious is that there is an if attached to most sentences.
Absolutely.
Meaning that people who are going there, I think that many people say, yes, this is definitely the crown of thorns. And then there are a lot of people who are probably going saying, well, if this is the crown of thorns, then I'm here to pay homage.
Right.
And I think that that's true for most religious pilgrimages. I think that's true for most religion, period.
To me, it's everything about religion. I mean, the very fact of Christ's incarnation is an admission by God that we can't see him. We can't reach him. We can't touch him without something in front of us that we know as ourselves, that we can recognize as ourselves. It's all fiction. All of life is fiction, as far as I'm concerned. Even our bodies are a fiction.
Now you sound like Jordan Peterson.
No, well, but no, because Jordan doesn't believe. I don't want to speak for Jordan.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that he doesn't quite believe in the truth beyond the fiction. And the thing is, I believe that's the only truth. Like, I believe this body is not the truth of me.
This is a metaphor for what's happening on
That's
the
right.
spiritual.
That's right.
If you would like to write in and tell me how wrong I am about Catholicism, Protestantism, Judaism,
Throw Islam in there.
Islam, Buddhism, or just
Women.
Or just
I won't read those.
just things should be nicer to me.
Head over to dailywire.com/subscribe. Write in your questions, and we'll be sure to get to them on our next episode of Backstage. I don't want to fake laugh. Do you guys?
No, I'm not into
How
that.
about an actual, authentic yawn in 3, 2, don't be a sociopath.